Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Double Play. I'm Ryan Donahue, joined today by my magnificent co-host, Jack Smith. It's been a while since we've done that, but the 2022 season is over. The Astros are your world champs, whether you like it or not. They're the best team in baseball. But first, before we get into that, Jack, how have you been?
That's it? I thought you were going to kind of follow that up with something. I am doing very well. 144 days till opening day. That's what's on my mind right now. But no, the World Series ended yesterday. I thought it was a fantastic series. I had a good weekend at USC football as well. The first home game in a month, which is pretty crazy. But unfortunately means I had to miss Game 6 of the World Series. But I had a blast watching the entirety of that series and of the postseason. I'm glad we get to come talk about it today.
Yeah, on the other hand, TCU had their last home game. Well, they've got one more, but it'll be over Thanksgiving break. So last home game that I could go to, I get to see them right off into the sunset. Still undefeated in their last home game that I'll get to see. So high hopes for that for both of our teams this week, or this year.
Well, yeah, maybe if they make the playoffs and they're in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, you can go watch them out in Georgia.
I will be anywhere if they're in the playoff.
That would be pretty cool. I think if USC does somehow end up making the playoff, they'd probably be the 4 seed. And that game's played in Arizona, so at least that's kind of close to Los Angeles. And if they make the Pac-12 championship game, it's in Las Vegas. But we're not here to talk about football. We're here to talk about baseball. I was right. The Astros beat the Phillies in 6 games. You picked the Astros as well in 7. It was a really weird series where at some point early in the series, after the Phillies launched 5 home runs off Lance McCullers in Game 3, I was starting to feel like maybe I was wrong and the Phillies were going to actually win the whole thing and be World Series champions, but it really turned around for the Astros after Game 3. You had a no-hitter in Game 4, a combined one at that, and then a couple other wins for the Astros. They rattle off 3 straight to win the series. I guess I'll start with this. After they were down 2-1, what changed for the Astros?
I think it was the pitching turned it up, and whether it was the pitching for the Astros or the lack of hitting for the Phillies, either way, the Phillies just stopped hitting the Astros pitching. And you mentioned the no-hitter. That kind of changed the course of the series. They were down 2-1, and then the Phillies just stopped hitting the baseball. And, I mean, Phillies, they were in Game 6. They took a late lead, but felt like after that Jordan home run, the momentum had flipped on its head, and the Phillies weren't going to win after that. They barely scratched the Schwarber home run in that game, and so after they went down a couple, it didn't feel like they were getting it back, but it really felt like that's what changed for the Astros. They started to shut down the Phillies hitters after, you mentioned, McCullers got blown up in Game 3. And then Astros took all the momentum, and once they went back home up 3-2, I didn't think they were going to lose back-to-back at home and to lose that series. And I think Game 5 was the game that the Phillies needed to win, bounce back after getting no hit, and try and go up 3-2, and you just have to win 1 of 2 in Houston. But I think once they went down 3-2 and the Astros pitching led them there, I think the series was over at that point.
Yeah, for me, you mentioned it could either be the Astros pitching well or the Phillies not hitting. I lean towards the second there. The Phillies just did not hit the ball after Game 3, in which they clubbed 5 home runs off Lance McCullers, because realistically, the Astros pitching was there for pretty much the entire series. Outside of Game 1, Justin Verlander and McCullers in that game, the Astros limited Phillies hitters for the most part. So I don't think it was even that the pitching stepped up. It's just kind of, they didn't have Lance McCullers on the mound, which means the Phillies really stopped hitting. They hit the 5 home runs in Game 3, but after that, they only scored 3 more runs for the rest of the series. They were no hit in Game 4 and only combined for 9 hits across Games 4, 5, and 6. So the Philly bats really slowed down. Against Framber Valdez in Game 6, it's a tough ask because they're really not built to beat left-handed pitching, but they couldn't get it done against Justin Verlander the second time he went out. They tried to make a late scratch for runs against Ryan Presley and the Houston bullpen, but I just thought the Phillies stopped hitting. I don't know what it was, really. They had all the momentum after Game 3, and for some reason they came out flat in Game 4, and I think that kind of decided the series, really gave Houston all the momentum. They were able to steal 2 in a row on the road, and then all they had to do was win 1 of 2 games back at home. They got it done quickly and made it a six-game series, but I was really just surprised that the Phillies stopped hitting. I've seen a lot of people talking about potentially just getting complacent after the 5 home runs, and there have been people complaining about the way that some of the lineups were organized, where Bryce Harper hitting 4th in the lineup. But for the most part, you had a lot of guys who had played a ton of baseball games. We talk about the World Series every year. You're adding pretty much another month onto the season for all these players, and for guys like JT Realmuto, who the broadcast mentioned caught way more innings than anyone in baseball this year, or Nick Castellanos, who had clearly taken a lot of swings, hadn't had a fantastic year, but Rhys Hoskins, like all these guys, like you're adding so many swings onto their plate, and sometimes it's hard to hold up, and I feel like pretty much everyone outside of Bryce Harper and some swings from Kyle Schwarber, I think it really caught up to the Phillies.
Yeah, definitely. And there was some big moments throughout the entire series for both teams. We could talk about that a little bit. The biggest one for the Phillies was their Game 1 comeback, and then the rest of it seemed like it was all Astros. The Astros, McCullers got rocked. We mentioned that, but they had that combined no-hitter. The crazy Game 5, the Chas McCormick catch, the big Yordan bomb we talked about. But, it seemed like most of these were Astros. We had the Game 3 rainout, which I was kind of leaning towards that helping the Phillies, but it ended up helping the Astros after they lost Game 3. But there were some big moments. Which ones do you want to talk about?
Yeah, well, let's start with Game 1 just because I feel like it was so important for Philadelphia. And it feels like the Astros, they were the better team in 5 of the 6 games, but Philly just had that dog in him, like we mentioned in the preview show, where the Houston jumps out to a big 5-0 lead. Your Kyle Tucker MVP pick was looking like a slam dunk because he hit 2 home runs in the first couple innings. And then Justin Verlandered in the World Series, where at that point he had not had a very good ERA. I believe the worst ERA among pitchers with a certain amount of innings, because I know he's thrown a lot in the World Series. And the Phillies ended up coming back to tie it. And then late in the game, JT Realmuto, extra innings home run. Nick Castellanos with a great diving catch to force it to extras, and then the Astros couldn't force a big rally in the bottom of the 10th inning, and so the Phillies end up taking Game 1, which really I thought set the tone for the World Series, and I thought the Phillies were going to be far more competitive throughout the rest of it, but they didn't really fight all that much in Game 2. Game 3, after the rainout, clearly they smacked the ball, but they kind of felt flat after that. I thought Game 1 was a message from the Phillies that, we're not going down easy. This is going 7 games. If not, we might win this before it gets there, and it just didn't seem that that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, Game 1, they won a game that I'm not going to say they weren't supposed to win or had no business winning, but they got outplayed very much early in that game, and then they came back. They had a chance to win, and that was one of my keys to the series. They had to win the games that they had a chance to, and they did there, and then they won Game 3. That was a game that they just won. They played better, and I was looking after Game 3. I texted you. It was Aaron Nola on the mound versus that was the game they got no hit. So it was Nola versus Javier, and I was like, am I crazy for thinking the Phillies go up 3-1 here? And then obviously that's not how that happened. They didn't win another game after Game 3, but they won Game 1 where they eked out that win, and then they didn't really do that in games that they had a chance to win. They had a chance to win Game 5 and 6. They didn't win those ones, and I think that was the difference. They couldn't take care of business when they had the chance, and that's kind of... If you're going to do that against a team like the Astros, who you're not favored to win against, you don't have a good chance in the series. If you have a chance to win, you had to take it, and they did in Game 1, but after that, it seemed like they didn't in games that they were in.
Yeah, there's 2 other things that I want to talk about before we kind of get to the final game in Game 6, which I guess somewhat includes what I wanted to bring up. We talked about the biggest strength for the Phillies was going to be Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler on the mound. Neither of them really had a good start. Both of them kind of got tagged a little bit in their first couple starts. Of course, Wheeler, he pitched well, but then got pulled early in Game 6, which we can talk about a little bit because it's a little reminiscent of Blake Snell, Kevin Cash against the Dodgers in the World Series. But I thought it was an interesting thing that we expected Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler to be these world beaters for the Phillies, and the Astros came prepared. It was some of the other guys they couldn't hit against, like the bullpen or Ranger Suarez. And then the other thing I want to talk about, we got to talk about the no-hitter, because a combined no-hitter, only the second no-hitter in World Series history. Just history. I guess the Astros making history once again. I thought that was just a big performance from Christian Javier, who might have been on his way to World Series MVP if he ever had to pitch again, but somehow he just rolls in, starts a combined no-hitter, and then doesn't have to throw again the entire series.
Yeah, I want to first talk about the first thing you mentioned about Wheeler being pulled early. I kind of saw that as a theme throughout the Phillies' entire postseason run. Rob Thompson had a quick leash with his starters throughout the entire postseason. We talked about it before, not on the show, but talked about Aaron Nola. He was getting pulled at like 70 to 80 pitches. Wheeler the same, and then Wheeler gets pulled at, I think it was like 68 was the number when that right before Jordan hit that bomb, and I kind of thought to myself, I didn't hate it. I'll be honest, like hindsight's obviously 2020. At the time, I didn't hate the move, but I was questioning it a little bit, and then because I was thinking, I mean, you got first and third at that point. I was thinking you just walk Jordan, get the double play, or in order, and if you give up one or two, if Bregman hurts you on righty with Wheeler pitching well that entire game, then you live with that. But obviously, I mean, Jordan hit the bomb off Alvarado anyway. The lefty-lefty matchup didn't work for him, and then after that, Alvarado ended up giving up more. He gave up another run, a couple more hits to the Astros. I mean, he came in to get Jordan out, didn't even do that, and then after that, he had to stay in for the minimum 3, and then they ended up giving another run. But I was questioning that move a little bit, and I mean, Rob Thompson, he stuck to what worked. I'll give him that throughout the entire postseason, and something we don't see a lot of managers do. Ironically, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and this time it broke.
Yeah, I remember we were kind of complimenting Rob Thompson in Game 1. We were kind of like, it's kind of one of those scenarios when he pulled Aaron Nola that you're like, no, wait, yes. It's like in football when a quarterback's rolling out and you don't want him to make a throw and it ends up as a touchdown, where he pulled Aaron Nola. He brought in Jose Alvarado to face, I don't remember who it was, but I know it included Jordan Alvarez and Kyle Tucker, and he mowed down the side, and then Sir Anthony Dominguez came in, and I think Zach Eflin pitched in Game 1 as well, and it worked out for the Phillies. They ended up blanking the Astros after they scored 5 early runs and winning 6-5. That move, I think, maybe motivated Rob Thompson to do the same thing with Wheeler in Game 6. It didn't work out then because Jordan Alvarez finally hit a ball. We talk about his pure hitting ability and how well he played early in the postseason, but he had been struggling up to that point until he finally came through and hit just a massive bomb in Game 6. But I thought it was an interesting decision, one that's going to get talked about for a while. But and then again, the same thing would have been said if it didn't work out with Game 1 and Aaron Nola. Hindsight is obviously 2020, so we'll see what the media reaction is over the next coming years to that decision. My guess is that people will not be kind to Rob Thompson, just like they weren't to Kevin Cash when he pulled Blake Snell in the World Series as well.
Yeah, and I think obviously, I mean, talk about hindsight. If that had come in and he gets Jordan to ground into a double play, or if he gets out of the inning, that was it. We look at that. That's a great move that he put in Alvarado, and I think there's some things that you put on the managers like that was like Blake Snell. It seemed, I mean, he was dealing that entire game, whereas Wheeler was in a little bit of trouble. So some things you can put on the manager, but other things it could just be guys not performing. And he trusted Alvarado. He had come through before in the series, but he didn't come through this time. So how much of it's on Rob Thompson, we don't know. He had faith in his guys, and it didn't work out. And bottom line is that they ended up losing the series after the home run.
I know that you're not one for the combined no-hitter, and you don't think it's quite as cool as the regular no-hitter, which I would agree. Is a combined no-hitter in the World Series cooler, and where does that rank on your likeness scale?
It's obviously cooler than a combined no-hitter in the regular season. But, I mean, I'd still take a regular season no-hitter over a World Series combined no-hitter because, I mean, we get to the World Series, obviously it's the two best teams as the way it played out throughout the postseason. So it is against a good team, but we've seen good teams get no-hit in the regular season. So what I say about the combined no-hitter is that it's more of the hitters can't hit rather than a pitching accomplishment is what I'm looking for. But nonetheless, it was like, wow. That's how I'll sum it up. For me, it was wow, the Astros threw a combined no-hitter rather than like oh my God, Christian Javier threw a no-hitter.
I think it's a bad take to say that you would take a regular season one-person no-hitter over a World Series combined no-hitter because even then, that's the first World Series combined no-hitter ever. So, like, I think with how much is on the line in the World Series. Christian Javier making his first World Series start, pitching a couple years ago on like the weirdest dirt field you ever seen. If you've seen that picture, if it's pretty awesome. If you haven't, go find it on Twitter. But like just how much magnitude that kind of game has in Philadelphia. I think I'd still take a World Series combined no-hitter over a single pitcher no-hitter in the regular season.
And you mentioned the first combined no-hitter in the World Series. That's also combined no-hitter. If you had mentioned that someone 10 years ago, they're like, why would you pull someone with a no-hitter?
Okay.
That's a pretty new concept.
Then only the second no-hitter in World Series history in general then. How about that?
Yeah, but it's a combined no-hitter, so it's different.
All right, whatever. You mentioned something that was really interesting where you think that that's sometimes just the hitters not hitting the ball as opposed to the pitchers pitching well. I'm curious because this kind of conversation comes up mostly in other sports, but do you think that the Phillies lost this series or do you think the Astros won it?
I think the Astros won it. I think it was theirs to win anyway, or theirs to lose, rather, if you want to use that terminology. So I think the Phillies had to be otherworldly, continuing their improbable run to dethrone the Astros, and it looked like they were doing that early, but the Astros kind of turned up what they've been doing all postseason and all season, really, and they took this series, and the Phillies had a chance, like I said, in Game 5 and Game 6. They didn't take that chance, but you can't blame them for against the Astros. It's tough to hit that bullpen. It's been, you mentioned in our preview show, it's one of the best in all of baseball, so I think the Astros won this series.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the bullpen. That's the best bullpen performance in postseason history. They're the only bullpen to throw 40 or more innings and have an ERA sub-1, which is just insane when you think about it. They leaned on the bullpen, especially when some of their starters didn't come through. Justin Verlander didn't have a great postseason. Framber Valdez was great, but of course Lance McCullers gets rocked, and some of the other pitchers didn't pitch incredibly well. The bullpen, pretty much in every time that they needed to come through, came through a sub-1 ERA. With 40 or more innings in the postseason is just crazy. I can't wrap my head around that. And, I said it going in. I'll say it again. The Astros have the best bullpen in the league.
Yeah, and so going forward for the Astros, it seems like they're here to stay. I mean, you think about the key players in this series. Jeremy Pena, one World Series MVP, which we forgot to mention. We'll talk about that as well. Yordan Alvarez with the big home run. Kyle Tucker with the 2 home run performance in Game 1. We talked about Christian Javier starting the less important combined no-hitter. I mean, it seems like they have a new young core forming as the old one starts to age out. They lost Correa, lost Springer. Bregman and Altuve are still there, but they're starting to age a little bit. Bregman's still surprisingly young when I looked at it, but they've got a new young core forming, and it seems like they're going to continue to run the American League for quite some time, and like they have for the last 3 years, last 4 years. They've been in the World Series 3 times. They won it this time, and if you want to go all the way back to 2017, is kind of when their dominance of the American League started, and I think that dominance is still going very strong. And what do you think the future looks like for the Astros?
Yeah, I would say it's just as bright as the present and the past, because I'm going to run you through a list of players, starting with these 4, Framber Valdez, Lance McCullers, Alex Bregman, Jose Altuve. They're all above 30, but the rest of these players, Hunter Brown, Jeremy Pena, Brian Abreu, who was great out of the bullpen, Luis Garcia, Christian Javier, who started the combined no-hitter, Yordan Alvarez, and Kyle Tucker, all under 30 years old. You have Justin Verlander, who maybe has a couple more years. I think that all those players that are under 30 will be Astros for a very long time. They're only getting better, and you supplant that with all the older talent that they have, the veteran presence that Jose Altuve brings, and Alex Bregman still being, an all MLB caliber third baseman. They're going to be so good. And also, one thing that I wanted to bring up, they will also be $90 million under the luxury tax this offseason. So they can make some moves. You get Justin Verlander off the books in a couple of years too. That frees you up a little bit as well, where obviously, you're going to be losing a great pitcher, but he does have a large contract, so you can maybe go into free agency and make a big move. I would expect the Astros to continue to get even better. And as we've seen for years from them, there's positions where they're just simply below average at. They didn't have, once Yuli Gurriel went down, they didn't really have a first baseman. Their DHs were 0 for the majority of the playoffs until Trey Mancini got a hit in Game 6. They've really never had a catcher that can play defense and offense. And Martin Maldonado, first of all, did you see the thing with him that he played through, I think it was a broken hand and a sports hernia that's going to require surgery? Like, they've got a lot of gritty players, but there's also a lot of positions that I don't think they've got a ton of talent at. And with $90 million, they can upgrade a lot of that. I'm looking at center field, I'm looking at first base, and I'm looking at the catcher position. I think that they can make some moves, and they will continue to be the cream of the crop in the American League, and I don't see many teams pushing them. I would expect them to be in the World Series again next year.
Yeah, and they don't even have to turn to free agency for that. I mean, we saw their player development is among the top in the league. All those guys, I think all of those guys, they either were homegrown or guys like Jordan, who came from the Dodgers at a young age, and they kind of developed him into what he was today. I mean, it's always a what if he had stayed with the Dodgers. Maybe they don't develop him as well. So
to be fair, the Dodgers got a haul with Josh Fields.
I still stand behind that. Made sense at the time. Josh Fields was he actually pitched very well and he was a rental reliever, but he pitched very well. I think it was the 2016 second half of the season. So he's no Yordan Alvarez, but I mean, we've texted about this. The picture of young Yordan at the time of the trade, dude's like my size. So I don't know how you can expect someone like that to be the monster that Yordan is. So
well, I feel like he's your like weight, but he was also like a lot taller than both of us.
I guess, but back to the point, it's on the Astros player development to get him to the big, strong dude that he is now, and not my weight. So, the Astros don't even have to turn to free agency. They got the money to if they want to, but they can also develop like almost no other team in the major leagues to get more talent at those positions where they were lacking.
Yeah, and I think that you might see them take a Braves approach as well, where they might try and start extending some of these younger players like Yordan Alvarez, Jeremy Pena, Kyle Tucker. Some of these guys are going to need to pay. So they're a team that doesn't need free agency like you just mentioned, but there's definitely a possibility that they can turn to it if need be, maybe even make some trades. Who knows? But the Astros, even if they went out and ran the same team out next year, I'd be confident they're going to win the American League West. I'd be confident they might be the 1 seed in the American League and make it to the World Series. But the idea that they can even improve should be scary for the rest of Major League Baseball. On the flip side, we've talked a lot about the Astros because they're the champs. The Philadelphia Phillies, an incredible run. I think you got to give so much credit to what Rob Thompson and Philadelphia did. They went from a team that everyone was clowning coming into the year, then Joe Girardi gets fired. Everyone thinks that Philadelphia's hopes of even the playoffs are down the drain. They come all the way back. They rally into the World Series, take a 2-1 lead. It didn't go well from there, but they had a fantastic season. I think we got to kind of give a round of applause to what Philadelphia did this season. And for you, what do you think the Phillies need to do this offseason and moving forward to make sure that this postseason run is not considered a fluke?
So before I answer that question, I want to take it back to last offseason, right when we were starting our show. We were talking about what the Phillies had done. It was probably as they were starting to struggle to open up the year, and I was saying, like, the Phillies, we knew they struggled with defense in their bullpen, and what hurt them earlier was their defense and their bullpen. So obviously it proved that they didn't need it, as they ended up making a World Series run and were two wins away from winning the World Series. But I think this offseason, you do want to focus on those weak points and just want to focus on doing whatever you can to improve the team so they can get back to the playoffs. And then once you're in the playoffs, anything can happen, as we saw this year. No one was expecting the Phillies to be in the World Series except for the people who saw my TikTok where I started a bracket with the Championship Series and then got both Championship Series and the World Series right. So everyone thinks I'm a genius or something, but no one thought they'd be here, so all you got to do is get back to the playoffs, and then anything can happen from there.
Yeah, I think a big piece that they need to think about is keeping Philly engaged. The city was has been behind the Phillies forever, really wanting them to succeed. And of course, they are very harsh critics, Philadelphia sports fans, but when you're playing well, they love you more than pretty much any city in the nation. You just look at how rowdy the games were in Philadelphia. I think they need to keep Philly engaged, and the way you do that is to capitalize on the window that is clearly open right now, where I think you continue to hammer free agency if you can, focus on staying competitive in a division that, yes, is going to be very difficult, but the Phillies have shown that they can be the team to get out of it and move on. So I think they need to keep Philly engaged by continuing to move forward in this window. Don't just say, hey, we're more of that, like, just barely making the wild card team. Like, they need to consider themselves a World Series caliber team and make sure they're doing everything they can to try and capitalize on this window and win a World Series. I think you look at some positions that they can improve, and I think you also look internally at players that they've paid. They need to focus on having a good offseason. Nick Castellanos, Rhys Hoskins, who struggled at the end of the postseason, like some guys that can improve. And then also, they do have young talent. They continue to grow. But I think you try and remix the team that you've got now by adding some pieces, maybe trimming the fat on the roster to keep Philly engaged. There was a great anecdote throughout the World Series. I think it was John Smoltz that brought it up about Alec Boehm, where, and you remember earlier in the year when Alec Boehm said, "I hate this place," and you think most fan bases would just throw that player to the curb. The Phillies fan base, who never really liked Alec Boehm to start his career and clearly wanted him to succeed, but nothing was going right, and he comes in and slanders the city, and they were behind him. They were saying, let's please take this as an opportunity to get better, and he did, and he was great down the stretch. Like, that's what the Phillies need to tap into, is the camaraderie around the city, around the team, because that's how they're going to continue to win, by being that misfit group that so many teams across the years have really benefited from, the underdog mentality. I think they need to make sure that they have that and keep the city engaged.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think as long as they are in the playoffs, I think Philly's going to bring it as long as you don't wait too long. If they're back in the playoffs next year, there's no reason to expect why Philly wouldn't be as rowdy as they were this offseason, because in their mind they're thinking, all right, let's run it back. I think I can speak for both of us here. We don't expect them to win the division, so if they're going to make the playoffs, it's going to be in that little bit of an underdog role again, maybe a little less so now that they had a run, but they definitely won't be favorites if they end up making it back to the playoffs, and I think Philly's going to like that, and they're going to bring the energy.
All right, I've got one more question for you before we get on to the actual question segment. Were you good with Jeremy Pena winning World Series MVP, and then also, who would you give complete postseason MVP to?
I think just off the top of my head, I haven't thought about the postseason MVP, but it might be the same answer with Jeremy Pena. I think, yes, Jeremy Pena should have been the World Series MVP. I think it was 2 hits in Game 6. He ended up hitting like .417, I think it was. He had my vote. They sent out a little fan vote notification. I voted for Jeremy Pena to win the World Series MVP, and probably would have voted for him regardless, unless Yordan Alvarez had a monster series, because I wasn't voting for Bregman or Altuve. But I think he did earn it, and he didn't have like huge moments in the series, but he was the best offensive player on the Astros team consistently throughout the series, and even the whole playoffs. I mean, I think it was an 8 or 9 game hit streak, and he had hits in all but one of their playoff games. So I think he gets the postseason MVP for me.
Yeah, honestly, I would not have voted for Jeremy Pena. I think he was fantastic. Clearly, the Astros have found themselves their shortstop moving forward. I think Framber Valdez kind of got disrespected, though. I think he should have been the World Series MVP. I think it was 12.1 innings pitched across the World Series, 2 earned runs. He had 18 strikeouts across 12 and a third. He won 2 of the games, and you only have to win 4. And I know he didn't obviously play every day like Jeremy Pena did, but I think that he deserved World Series MVP. He had that big performance in Game 6 that helped them win, set up the win based on the Yordan Alvarez bomb. I thought Framber Valdez deserved it, but it's also hard to win as a pitcher when it only goes 6 games, you only get to throw twice. But I would have voted for Framber Valdez. And then I know it was in a losing effort, but I think the postseason MVP has to be Bryce Harper. I don't think we've seen a more dominant postseason from a hitter in a very long time. And I know they lost, so you really never see that, but Bryce Harper was on another level. He strikes fear in the opponent whenever he comes up to the plate, and he actually capitalizes on it and hits so many big home runs. I don't know whether he got the extra base hit record in a postseason, but he was fantastic. I would say, right up there with playoff Randy Arozarena from a couple years ago.
Yeah, Harper was definitely great, and I feel like, you mentioned it, kind of touched on it with Valdez. I feel like if you're a pitcher and you're going to win a series MVP, you got to make at least 3 appearances. I feel like that's kind of the unwritten rule of thumb that we kind of see when pitchers win. It's because they have 2 good starts and then also have like a relief appearance in Game 7 or something. So I feel like that's where he kind of missed out there. Maybe I think that's where he kind of missed out on it. Maybe if he had gone like 7 or 8 in one of the starts, you could see it. But no doubt he was great. But I feel like that's where that's where he missed out on the MVP.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've got some questions prepared for you to round out the episode. Let's take a minute. That's the end of the 2022 season. It was a really great one. I know you put out a TikTok thanking all of our fans, but if you guys are still watching or listening to this episode, thank you guys so much for supporting us in our first season. That's all the way we went from the start of the lockout, got past the lockout, and we had a full MLB season in the postseason. It was great. I'm glad it finally got off the ground, ended at a regular time, although it was kind of weird seeing, I always find it weird, the World Series ending in November, where they called the October the Fall Classic, and yet here we are November 6th recording a reaction to the World Series. But we got past the lockout and had a great first season, and we can't thank you guys enough.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun doing this, and still more things to come. We're excited for what's to come.
Yeah, next week we'll have an episode about the awards, but for now, I got some questions for you. I've got 3 would you rather questions, so I'm going to give you 2 different options you could pick. Not like King of the Hill, they don't move on to the next round or anything. 3 separate questions. Would you rather have the Astros young core, which we just talked about, or the Braves young core, which we applaud so often?
I feel like it's got to go with the Braves young core, and if you're taking the contracts along with that, it's definitely the Braves, because it seems like every one of those guys are locked up for a long time. And I was gonna text you. We like 20 minutes ago or something. We were talking about Braves just made the first move of the offseason, traded for Sam Hilliard. But so I was gonna say next notification I'm gonna get is he signed for 8 years, $12 or something like that. So but my point is they lock up their young core for cheap. It seems like it's a steal of a deal every time they sign someone new, so I'm going with the Braves.
All right, well, yeah, we mentioned offseason moves. There's supposedly a second offseason move rumored. I don't believe it's official yet, but Edwin Diaz going to return to the Mets on what I think was a 5-year, $105 million deal, which would be the first 9-figure deal ever for a reliever, and $21 million being the highest a reliever will ever get. So a question I have for you, because it's a question that kind of raised in my mind, would you rather have a closer by committee or a closer on a 9-figure deal? Because people have questioned, what the value is of a reliever. Edwin Diaz and other closers have proven to be volatile year to year. 9 figures is a lot to sink into a reliever. Which would you rather have?
I think if I'm a team like the Mets, who I expect to compete in that entire time, I'm taking the 9-figure deal. Just because, if you have a closer by committee in the playoffs, it's very shaky and I don't really trust it. So I feel like if you're gonna pay someone that time, it's got to be if you're a team that is trying to win a World Series and expects to be there year in and year out. Because I'd much rather take a guy I don't care how much I'm paying if he's gonna get the last 3 outs of a World Series win.
Yeah, no, I understand that. The Phillies didn't really have a full-fledged closer throughout the year, and I don't even think they really had one in the postseason. So I think there's an argument there, though, because we'll see, obviously, how it plays out, but that's a lot of money to sink into a closer, especially Edwin Diaz, who, even though he was fantastic this year, has proven to kind of have up and down years, where Mets fans 2 years ago, pretty much to this date, really hated seeing Edwin Diaz come into the game. So I think it's going to be interesting. We'll see how it plays out, or if it actually happens. I think Jeff Passan reported on it as well, so maybe it's a little bit more cut and dry, clear that Edwin Diaz will be returning to New York. So I've got one last question for you. This one, another kind of team-building one. Would you rather have a perennial MVP winner on your team or a perennial Cy Young winner on your team?
I'm a hitter's guy. Give me an MVP. I feel like that's... Cy Young does so much for the team, but MVP, perennial MVP candidate. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it,
because then again you're ending up like the Angels.
That's literally Mike Trout popped into my head, and I was like, well, he's not winning games. But
your trick answer could just say Shohei Ohtani and have both.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. But no, I'm gonna stick with the MVP. I feel like brings so much excitement, at least to the fan base, because Mike Trout will, if I'm thinking from my owner business perspective, he'll at least put butts in the seats even if you're not winning games.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. What's your question for me?
So I'm gonna do something kind of like a King of the Hill, but this is rank these 5 free agents. We talked about Edwin Diaz being the first free agent move. I also got a notification while we're doing this episode. Xander Bogaerts has looked like it's confirmed he's opting out, so he's going to be another free agent. He's not on this list, though. The 5 guys I'm asking you to rank are Trey Turner, Carlos Correa, who has also opted out of his deal, Carlos Rodon, Jacob deGrom, and Aaron Judge.
That's interesting. I think as much as Jacob deGrom has proven he's the best pitcher in baseball when he's going, I think you have to start with Aaron Judge at number 1. And I it's tough to put him over Jacob deGrom because of the dominance we've seen from deGrom. But Aaron Judge had the best season of the year. He has one of the best seasons of all time. He continues to mash. I think you got to go Aaron Judge number 1. That makes deGrom slot in at number 2. And then I'm left with Rodon, Trey Turner, Carlos Correa. I don't know. I am a really big fan of Carlos Rodon, and I'm very tempted to put him at 3. I think he's probably... I don't know if I want to say this. I think he's probably the best left-handed starter in baseball. I think that you've got some competition with Shane McClanahan and Framber Valdez. But I would argue the last 2 seasons, he's the best left-handed starter in baseball. I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to put him at 3, and then Carlos Correa and Trey Turner. I think Correa is probably the better player. That being said, I think Trey Turner has been more consistent. I think he's had, if you're looking at the last 2 to 3 years, combined better years than Carlos Correa. So I might, if I'm a team, be looking to sign Carlos Correa over Trey Turner this free agency. But as players, I think I'm going to rank Trey Turner 4 and Carlos Correa 5. So we'll go Judge, deGrom, Rodon, Trey Turner, Carlos Correa.
And then where does your boy Brandon Belt slot into that 5?
He's probably, he didn't hit 62 home runs, but he pitched in college, so at least he can provide some value. I'll put him in at number 2.
I was gonna say no. I thought you were gonna go number 1 with that.
No, I think Aaron Judge hitting 62. Like if he had stopped at 61, there might have been room for Brandon Belt to go number 1.
That's fair.
Do you agree with the way I listed out those 5?
I probably would have gone Rodon lower, but yeah, just because I value hitting over pitching.
Well, yeah, that's because you're biased. Well, I guess because I'm biased too, but. Yeah. That's all we've got. You wanna bring us home today?
Sure, let's do it. Like we said, thank you guys for listening. I mean, this is the end of one more episode for the end of our 2022 season. Thank you guys for being here all season long. Or if you're new, make sure to subscribe, like, follow, comment. All of our socials are here. If you're on podcasts, Spotify or Apple, it's in the description. We thank you guys for being here. We've been the Double Play Baseball, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, Carlos Rodon just actually opted out of his deal, so he is officially a free agent, number 3 on the list. See you guys next week.